Hey guys, it's Matt with BleepinJeep. Mamba Wheels sent me an awesome set of new wheels for my truck, and that got me to thinking, what are the most common questions I get from you guys about wheels? I've got a lot, and I've got a lot to explain. Let's head on inside. I'll teach you the basics. Buying wheels for your vehicle can be pretty confusing, but hopefully after watching this video, you'll have a better understanding of what these terms mean. The first thing that we're going to look at is wheel size. So let's go with a 15 by 8. Now what does that mean? The 15 is the diameter of the wheel, and the 8 is the width of the wheel. So let's say you're going to put on a 31 1050 15 tire. Now that means that the tire is 31 inches tall, 10.5 inches wide, and the wheel opening is 15 inches. The tire must have the same diameter opening as the wheel. So this last number right here, the last number in the tire measurement, needs to match the first number of the wheel measurement, 15 and 15. That tire will go onto that wheel. Now it's important to realize that the wheel measurement is actually the inside where the bead sits. It's not the actual outside of the wheel, but it's just inside that where the bead sits on both the diameter and on the width. So when getting a wheel, not only do you need to be concerned about the diameter, but also the width. So the width of the wheel is 8 inches, the width of the tire is 10.5. Now a lot of people think that might not work, but it is going to work. The width is a little more forgiving, but there is one thing you need to know about. If you have a very narrow wheel, let's say you have a 7-inch wide wheel and you have a 10.5 inch tire, it's going to be more flexible. So it's when you're going around turns or when you're on rocks like what we do, it's going to flex and kind of bend off of that wheel. Whereas if you have a 10-inch wheel on a 10.5 inch tire, it's not going to have as much pull side to side, but the ride will be a little stiffer as well. Sometimes racers run into this problem when you're going around a turn at a very high speed and you have a small width wheel and a larger width tire. It can pull off the edge and you won't have very good turning or handling ability. So the next important thing we're going to talk about is bolt pattern, or sometimes called PCD, pitch circle diameter. So that is the holes in the wheel, and it needs to match up with the lug pattern on your axles. So for this example, let's use a 5 on 4.5. Now what does that mean? The first number is the number of lugs, or the number of studs on your axle, and it also is the number of holes in your wheel, obviously. So 5 means that there's 5 lugs. If you have a 6 lug pattern, the first number is going to be 6. Now the second number is the pitch circle diameter. So if you were to draw an imaginary line between the center of all of these bolt holes, the width across there, the diameter, would be 4.5 inches in this case. Now it really gets tricky because some of these are measured in millimeters, so you have to be cautious of that. But if you have a 6 lug pattern, or a 4 lug pattern, or an 8 lug pattern, all you have to do is measure across. So from center of hole to center of hole. Of course, it's easier to measure from the outside of one hole to the inside of the other hole. That will be the same as center to center distance. But it's a little more complicated when you have an odd pattern, because you can't measure from one to the other because it's not straight across. So what can you do in that case? Well, you measure back to center from one hole, and then you skip a hole, and then you go to the next hole. So you measure from the far side of this hole to the center of this hole. Or another way to do that is measure from center to center and then multiply that by 1.05. So in this case, when you measure, you get about 4.25 from center to center. You multiply that times 1.05 and you get about 4.5 inches. So 5 on 4.5. Most Jeep patterns are going to be 5 on 4.5 or 5 on 5, and like my truck is a 6 by 150. 6 holes, 150 millimeters apart. So the next important thing to consider on a wheel is offset or backspacing. This is where a lot of people get confused because there's two terms for it. Backspacing is basically just the old school way of doing it. Nowadays, people typically use offset. And offset is measured in millimeters. Backspacing is usually measured in inches. So another term for offset is ET, which is an abbreviation for a German word, Einpresstiefe, and it literally means insertion depth. So let's talk about offset and backspacing real quick. Offset is the mounting surface from the center of the wheel, and backspacing is the back of the wheel to the mounting surface. So when you have a wheel, it mounts to your axle, right? So this is the axle coming in, and this is the mounting surface. If you have 0 offset, then the wheel mounting surface is directly in the center of the wheel. If you have -30 offset, that means that the wheel mounts more towards the axle. So you have this really deep dish wheel, and the axle is mounted on this side. And what does that do? That puts the wheel further out on the vehicle. So if you can imagine, here's your axle and it's mounted real close on this side. The tire is going to be way out here, kind of sticking outside of the wheel wells. And if you have a +25, it's going to be completely the opposite. So your axle shaft comes all the way in here, your brakes and everything sit inside here. The wheel is mounted very close to the outside, which is going to push your wheel and your tire more towards the inside of the vehicle. Now backspacing is just a different way of looking at the same thing. Instead of measuring from the center of the wheel to the mounting surface, backspacing measures from the back of the wheel to the mounting surface. So in this example, it's 3.5 inches. It's kind of towards the center of the wheel. In this example, it's only 2 inches, which means it's pushed out more this way, so the wheel and tire is further out. In this example, it's 5 inches. So 5-inch backspacing is a lot of backspacing, which means that the wheel is going to be in quite a bit. So the higher number on the backspacing number, the more the wheel is going to be in, and the higher number on the offset, the more the wheel is going to be in. So if you need to look back at this chart, this is really helpful to see what the difference between offset and backspacing is, and it kind of gives you a visual of where your wheel and tire is going to sit depending on how much offset or backspacing you have. Now with backspacing, there's one other important thing that I should note. Backspacing doesn't take into account the width of the wheel, so that's probably why they went to offset. Offset, remember, is from the center. So backspacing, let's say you have a 3.75-inch backspacing. Well, it's going to be different where the wheel mounts if you have a 10-inch wheel versus, say, a 25-inch wheel. So, of course, they don't make 25-inch wheels for our applications, but if they did, it would be way different than a 10-inch wheel because it's measured from the back side of the wheel and not the center. And the last thing to think about when buying wheels is the bore. Now the bore size is this hole in the center of the wheel. Most aftermarket wheels use a larger bore to fit more vehicles, and you may need hub centering rings. So aftermarket companies are smart, right? They make this hole bigger so that it can fit more applications. So they can sell more wheels for different vehicles and not have to worry so much about the center bore. Now what does this mean? That means sometimes you might have to have a centering ring for a hub-centric vehicle. And what that means is that this hole in the middle lines up with your hub. So when you put the wheel on there, that makes sure that it's center, and then when you tighten it down, that doesn't affect it anymore. So a lot of times you'll see a plastic hub centering ring, and people think that since it's plastic, it's no good because it's cheap and it's going to break. But really that plastic ring is just there to get everything lined up until you put the lug nuts on. And when you put the lug nuts on, at that point, all the stress is taken off of that plastic hub centering ring. So that's a hub centric. In the Jeep world, you don't really have so much hub centric wheels. Usually you have lug centric wheels. And what that means is that the lug actually centers the wheel. So more modern cars though, you use the hub centric method, and then the older stuff uses the lug centric. and those lugs are like little triangles, and when you tighten them down, they kind of center the wheel into place. But in our world, another thing to consider is the hub size for if you have locking hubs. So if you've got that big huge thing in the middle on your front axle and it locks and unlocks your hubs, you really need to take into account the size of that because it has to fit through that hole in the center of your wheel. If you're confused about any of this stuff, keep in mind that most wheel companies, Mamba included, if you call them, all you have to do is tell them about your vehicle, what you've got going on, and they will be able to find the right wheel and the right fit. So if any of this confuses you, don't worry too much about it. Just give them a call and they'll get you fixed up. Alright guys, as we were talking there, I had some garden gnomes outside mounting those wheels on my truck. Let's go check it out. Holy cow, those garden gnomes are fast. Check out the difference though. Those are some nice wheels. So these are the Mamba M19s. What's interesting about these is that a lot of the Jeepers like this particular wheel. And I happen to put it on my Tundra. They happen to have it in the right size and bolt pattern for the Tundra. So if you're interested in checking these out, they're from Mamba Wheels. I'll leave a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, guys. I appreciate it. If you learned something in this video, make sure to hit the thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/BleepinJeep if you'd like to help support make more of these videos. We'll see you next time.